He was wrong about three things. Wrong about the painting being worthless. Wrong about me not understanding French. And most importantly, wrong about thinking I'd let my daughter spend her life married to a man who couldn't recognize what truly matters. My son-in-law Philippe had no idea that his whispered comment at that Thanksgiving dinner had just started a clock ticking. A clock that would run for exactly 3 years before it chimed. Let me back up a bit. My name is Douglas Mackenzie. Most folks around Edmonton just call me Doug. I'm 64 years old, and for the past 31 years, I've worked as a janitor at Strathcona High School. Before that, I did the same job at a middle school across town. That's 37 years total of mopping floors, fixing lockers, unclogging toilets, and making sure the boiler doesn't quit in January when it's minus 30 outside. It's honest work, the kind that leaves your hands rough and your back sore, but lets you sleep well at night. My wife, Margaret, passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. She was the love of my life. A Quebecoise woman from Trois-Rivières who'd come out west for university and never left. Maggie taught me everything beautiful in this world, including her language. We'd speak French at home sometimes, especially when we didn't want our daughter to understand what we were talking about when she was young. By the time she was a teenager, she'd picked up enough to follow along, but she never became truly fluent. That was our private language, Maggie's and mine. Our daughter, Christine, is my whole world now. She's a pharmacist, runs the dispensary at a hospital downtown. Smart as a whip, kind as her mother, and stubborn as a Mackenzie. 4 years ago, she married Philippe Tremblay, a venture capitalist from Westmount, Montreal, the kind of neighborhood where the houses have names instead of numbers. I'll be honest, I had concerns from the start, not because Philippe wasn't successful, not because his family had money that made my annual salary look like pocket change, but because of the way he looked at me that first time we met. That particular expression people wear when they're calculating someone's net worth and finding it insufficient. But Christine loved him, and she asked me to give him a chance. So I did. The incident happened at Thanksgiving 2022. Christine and Philippe were hosting dinner at their new house in Glenora, one of Edmonton's wealthy neighborhoods. The kind of place where the lawns are manicured by services and the driveways hold cars that cost more than my house. Philippe's parents had flown in from Montreal for the occasion. His father, Jean-Pierre, was a retired investment banker. His mother, Monique, had never worked a day in her life, at least not the kind of work that earns a paycheck. His younger brother, Mark, had come too, along with Mark's wife, Sylvie, both of them lawyers at some big firm in Toronto. I'd brought a gift for Philippe, something I'd been thinking about for months. The dining room was decorated like something from a magazine, everything tasteful and expensive and perfectly arranged. The turkey was from some heritage farm. The wine was from some exclusive vineyard. Even the napkins looked like they cost more than my grocery bill. I felt out of place the moment I walked in, wearing my good blazer, the one I'd bought for Maggie's funeral. Philippe greeted me at the door with that handshake of his. Firm enough to seem confident, but somehow never warm. "Doug, glad you could make it. Here, let me take your coat." Christine hugged me properly, the way daughters should. "Dad, I'm so happy you're here. Come on, everyone's in the living room." Jean-Pierre was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch that probably cost $50 a pour. He was telling some story about a stock trade he'd made back in the 80s, how he'd seen the crash coming before anyone else. "Douglas," his voice boomed across the room when he spotted me. "The working man himself. How are things at the school? Still pushing that broom?" There it was, that tone. Friendly on the surface, but with an edge underneath that made pushing that broom sound like something to be pitied. "The floors don't clean themselves," I replied. "I suppose not." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Thank God for people like you. Someone has to do it, right?" I saw Christine tense beside me. She knew. She always knew. Dinner was elaborate. Philippe had hired a caterer, some French-Canadian fusion cuisine that looked beautiful but left me wondering if there'd be anything filling. The conversation flowed around me like water around a rock. Stock portfolios, property investments, a chalet they were thinking of buying in Tremblant. I nodded along, contributed when I could. Mostly I just watched Christine. Watched how she navigated between her father's world and her husband's. Watched the tiredness behind her smile. After dessert, some complicated chocolate thing with gold leaf on it, Christine suggested we exchange gifts. A Tremblay tradition, apparently. Giving presents at Thanksgiving instead of Christmas. That's when I pulled out the wrapped package I'd brought. It was larger than a book, smaller than a briefcase, flat and rectangular. "Philippe," I said, handing it to him. "This is for you. It belonged to my grandmother. I thought you might appreciate it." Christine's eyes lit up. She knew what it was. I'd shown it to her years ago, told her the story behind it. Philippe took the package with that polite smile people use when they're already preparing to fake gratitude. The room went quiet as everyone watched him unwrap it. Inside was a painting, small, maybe 12 inches by 16. Oil on board. It showed a landscape, jack pines on a rocky outcrop overlooking a lake, the sky full of movement and color. The style was bold, almost aggressive. The kind of painting that didn't try to be pretty, just tried to be true. My grandmother, Elsie Mackenzie, had been a cook at a fishing lodge in northern Ontario back in the 1922. The lodge had hosted artists sometimes, painters who'd come up to capture the wilderness. One summer, a young artist had stayed for 2 weeks. He'd been quiet, kept to himself mostly, but he'd taken a liking to my grandmother's cooking. Before he left, he'd given her this small painting as thanks. A sketch, really. Something he'd done quickly one afternoon. She'd kept it her whole life. Passed it to my father, who passed it to me. It had hung in our hallway for as long as I could remember. That little window into the northern landscape. After Maggie died, I'd thought about what to do with it. Our house felt empty. The painting felt like it belonged somewhere new, somewhere it could mean something to a new family. So I decided to give it to Philippe. A peace offering, I suppose. A way of saying, you're part of this family now. Here's something that connects us to our past. Philippe held the painting up, examining it with the kind of expression art collectors use when they're trying to look knowledgeable. "It's rustic," he said. Monique leaned over to look. "Quite amateur, isn't it? That brushwork is very rough." Then Philippe turned to his father and said something in French. Quick, under his breath, but clear as day, to me. Another piece of junk from the janitor. "What am I supposed to do with this? Hang it in the garage?" Jean-Pierre chuckled softly. "At least it's small. You can hide it in a closet." "The old man thinks this makes him cultured," Philippe continued, still in French. "A finger painting from his grandmother. Probably bought it at a garage sale." Mark snorted into his wine. Sylvie looked away, hiding a smile. Monique shook her head slightly. The kind of gesture that said, "What can you expect?" They thought I didn't understand. Why would I? The Scottish janitor from Edmonton. The man who pushed a broom for a living. The father-in-law they tolerated because they had to. They'd made their assumptions. They were wrong. 32 years married to Maggie. 32 years of French at home, French films, French books, trips to Quebec to visit her family. My French wasn't perfect, but it was more than good enough to understand every word. I sat there watching Philippe set the painting aside like it was something he'd need to donate later, watching Christine's face fall as she registered his lack of enthusiasm, watching the Tremblays exchange those knowing glances. Christine tried to salvage the moment. "Dad, that's so thoughtful. It's beautiful, really. I remember you showing me this when I was little." Philippe nodded absently. "Yes, very. Sentimental." He said the word like it was a diagnosis of something terminal. I could have spoken up right then. Could have responded in fluent French. Could have let them know I'd understood every dismissive word. But I looked at Christine, at the exhaustion in her eyes, at the way she was holding herself together for this dinner. This wasn't the moment, not for her sake. So I smiled. I nodded. I accepted Philippe's cold thanks, and I started thinking. Over the next 3 years, I watched. I waited. I paid attention. I learned that Philippe collected art. Expensive art. He had pieces from emerging Canadian artists, contemporary stuff that looked like accidents to me, but apparently cost tens of thousands of dollars. He'd talk about art like it was investment strategy, all about appreciation rates and market positioning. I learned that he spoke French primarily with his family, switching languages whenever they wanted to discuss something privately. Christine had mentioned feeling left out sometimes, how they'd shift from English to French mid-conversation at family gatherings. I learned that despite his art collection and his confident pronouncements at gallery openings, Philippe knew almost nothing about Canadian art history, nothing about the movements and artists that had defined the country's visual culture. He could quote auction prices, but he couldn't tell you why a painting mattered. And I learned something else, something that changed everything. It happened about a year after that Thanksgiving. I was doing some repairs at the school when old Mr. Henderson, the retired art teacher, stopped by to pick up some supplies he'd left behind. We got to talking, the way you do. He mentioned he was writing a book about Canadian art history, specifically about the Group of Seven and their circle. You know, I said, just making conversation, my grandmother had a little painting from that era. Some artist gave it to her when she was cooking at a lodge up north. Mr. Henderson's eyebrows went up. Really? Do you know who the artist was? She never said. He was young, apparently, just starting out. Would you let me take a look at it sometime? These things interest me. I almost said no. The painting was at Christine's house now, wherever Philippe had hidden it. But something made me curious. I'll see if I can dig it up, I said. A month later, I asked Christine about the painting. She found it in a storage closet, still in the frame I'd given it in. She seemed surprised. I wanted it back, but she didn't ask questions. I brought it to Mr. Henderson. I'll never forget the way his face changed when he looked at it. The casual interest shifted to something else. He got very quiet. He turned the painting over, examined the back, held it up to the light. "Doug," he said slowly, "do you know who painted this?" "No idea. I think I need to make some calls." What happened next took several months. Mr. Henderson contacted a friend at the Art Gallery of Ontario. That friend contacted someone at the National Gallery in Ottawa. Photographs were taken. Experts were consulted. Eventually, I was asked to bring the painting to Toronto for examination. The artist, it turned out, was Franklin Carmichael. If you don't know Canadian art, that name might not mean much to you. But Franklin Carmichael was one of the founding members of the Group of Seven, the most famous art movement in Canadian history. His paintings hang in every major museum in the country. They've sold at auction for millions of dollars. This particular piece, this small sketch on board, was from 1923, a study for a larger work, painted during one of Carmichael's trips to northern Ontario. The style was consistent. The materials were consistent. The provenance, as much as could be established through my grandmother's story and some corroborating details from lodge records that a determined archivist managed to locate, was solid. The painting, the piece of junk from the janitor, was worth approximately $200,000, possibly more, given its history and the story attached to it. I sat in my kitchen in Edmonton, holding the appraisal letter, reading the number over and over. I hadn't sold it. Couldn't bring myself to. It was my grandmother's gift, my family's connection to something larger than ourselves. But I also couldn't stop thinking about Philippe's words, about the way he'd laughed with his family, about the way they'd dismissed not just the painting, but everything it represented. Everything I represented. 3 years I waited. 3 years of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings where I sat quietly while the Tremblays spoke French over my head. 3 years of Philippe's patronizing comments about my job, my clothes, my simple life. 3 years of watching Christine try so hard to bridge two worlds that her husband had no interest in connecting. Then, in November 2025, Philippe called to invite me to a dinner party. His firm had just closed some major deal, something involving tech companies and hundreds of millions of dollars. He was being promoted to senior partner. They were celebrating at the house. "We'd love to have you there, Doug," Christine insisted. I could hear in his voice that he hadn't insisted at all. But Christine had, and that meant something. "I'll be there," I said. I spent 2 weeks making arrangements. The dinner party was even more elaborate than that Thanksgiving 3 years earlier. The house was full, maybe 25 guests, all of them dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly pension. The men in tailored suits, the women in designer everything. Philippe's entire family had come from Montreal for the occasion. Jean-Pierre was telling war stories about deals he'd made in the 70s. Monique was holding court with the other wives, discussing something about interior designers. I arrived on time, dressed in the good suit I'd bought for the occasion. My first new suit in 8 years. Christine hugged me at the door, whispering, "Thanks for coming, Dad. I know these things aren't your favorite." Philippe was already commanding the room, drink in hand, laughing with a silver-haired man I recognized from news articles. Some CEO whose company Philippe had just helped acquire something or other. "Doug," Philippe's voice carried across the room. "Everyone, this is my father-in-law, Doug Mackenzie. Keeps the schools of Edmonton running smoothly. He's a janitor." There was that polite laughter again, the kind that acknowledges someone's presence while simultaneously establishing their place in the hierarchy. I shook hands, made small talk, let the evening flow around me. Dinner was catered by some French restaurant. 7 courses, each one announced like it was a museum exhibit. Wine pairings that Philippe explained with the confidence of someone who'd memorized a script. During the main course, some elaborate lamb preparation, Philippe started talking about his art collection, showing off a new acquisition to the CEO, some contemporary piece that looked like someone had spilled paint on a canvas while having a seizure. 45,000, he was saying. It's already appreciated 15%. Canadian contemporary is extremely hot right now. Beautiful piece, the CEO agreed. You have quite the eye. That's when Jean-Pierre spoke up, in French. Assuming the CEO couldn't understand, remember that awful painting Doug gave him, the one his grandmother supposedly got from some artist? He chuckled. It's still in the closet, isn't it? Philippe laughed. Somewhere, probably. I should donate it to a thrift shop. The janitor thought he was giving us art, Monique added, shaking her head. It's sweet, really. He doesn't know any better. I set down my fork, looked up, met Philippe's eyes. Actually, I said quietly, I was wondering about that painting. The French conversation stopped abruptly. Philippe's smile flickered. The painting, the one from my grandmother. Do you still have it? Philippe glanced at his father. Yes, I think so. Why do you ask? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Set it on the table next to my plate. Because, I said, I had it authenticated professionally. Would you mind bringing it out? I think everyone here might find it interesting. The color drained from Philippe's face. His parents had gone still. Doug, I don't think this is really the time to, Je pense que c'est exactement le bon moment, I said in French. I think this is exactly the right time. N'est-ce pas? The silence that followed was absolute. Christine was staring at me like I'd transformed into someone else. The CEO looked confused. The other guests sensed something happening, even if they didn't understand what. You speak French, Philippe said. It wasn't a question. 32 years, married to a Quebecoise woman? I replied, still in French. You think I never learned? I switched back to English, keeping my voice calm. 3 years ago, at Thanksgiving, you called my grandmother's painting junk. You said I was trying to seem cultured. Your mother called it amateur. Your father suggested hiding it in a closet. I paused. I understood every word. Monique's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate. Philippe looked like he might be sick. Please, I said politely, get the painting. I think Mr. Bergman here might be interested to see it. You collect Canadian art, don't you, sir? The CEO, to his credit, nodded. I do, actually. Quite passionately. Christine stood up. I'll get it. Her voice was shaking. I know where it is. She disappeared toward the storage room. The silence stretched. Philippe stared at his plate. His parents exchanged panicked looks. Mark had gone white. Christine returned, carrying the painting. She set it carefully on the empty sideboard. I stood up, walked over to it, turned it so everyone could see. This painting, I said, was given to my grandmother, Elsie Mackenzie, in 1923. She was a cook at a fishing lodge near Orillia, Ontario. The artist who gave it to her was a young man who'd stayed for 2 weeks that summer, painting the landscape. I opened the envelope and handed the documents to Mr. Bergman. His name was Franklin Carmichael. Mr. Bergman's eyebrows shot up. He grabbed the papers, started reading. A founding member of the Group of Seven, I continued, Canada's most influential art movement. This is a study for one of his larger works, painted during one of his Northern Ontario trips. Mr. Bergman looked up from the documents. This is authenticated by the National Gallery and appraised by Christie's Auction House in Toronto. And the value? I paused just long enough for the room to hold its breath. Approximately $200,000, possibly more at auction, given the provenance. You could have heard a pin drop. Philippe's hand was shaking. His father had gone gray. His mother looked like she wanted to disappear. Christine was staring at me with tears in her eyes. Not tears of anger, something else. The piece of junk from the janitor, I said softly, looking at Philippe. The finger painting you were going to donate to a thrift shop, worth more than your entire contemporary collection combined. Philippe opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. I walked back to my chair, but I didn't sit down. 3 years ago, I said, I gave you that painting as a gift, a family heirloom. My grandmother cherished it her whole life, not because she knew who painted it, but because a kind young man had given her something beautiful in appreciation for her hospitality. My father cherished it. I cherished it. 60 years of a family's history. I let that sink in. You called it junk because it came from me, because a janitor couldn't possibly own anything valuable, because in your world, worth is measured in dollars, and people who push brooms couldn't possibly understand anything about art or culture or quality. Philippe finally found his voice. Doug, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know you had no idea, I said. That's the point. You didn't bother to find out. You made assumptions based on what I do for a living, what I wear, how I talk. You never considered that there might be more to the story, more to me. I looked around the room at all these successful people in their expensive clothes, staring at me like they were seeing me for the first time. I've been a janitor for 37 years, I said. I've cleaned up after thousands of children. I've fixed things that broke. I've kept buildings running so that teachers could teach and students could learn. It's not glamorous work. It doesn't make you rich, but it matters. It has dignity. I turned back to Philippe. Your wife is my daughter. When I gave you that painting, I wasn't trying to impress you. I was trying to welcome you into our family, into our history. That painting represented something money can't buy, a connection across generations, a story worth telling. Philippe was crying now, actual tears running down his face. Here's the thing, I said, and my voice softened. I could have humiliated you 3 years ago, could have responded in French right there at the dinner table, could have made it ugly and immediate, but that wouldn't have helped anyone, least of all Christine. I picked up the painting and walked over to Philippe. I'm not here tonight to destroy you, Philippe. I'm here to teach you something my father taught me, and his father taught him. I held up the painting. This painting isn't valuable because of what it costs. It's valuable because of what it represents. The years, the hands that held it, the moments it witnessed, my grandmother's kindness to a young artist, my father's love of beauty, my connection to them, to Maggie, to the life we built together. I set the painting on the table in front of him. That's what you dismissed. Not junk. A legacy. The room was frozen. Then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I'm giving it to you again, I said. Properly this time. Christine made a small sound. Philippe looked stunned. But on one condition, I continued. Philippe wiped his eyes. Anything. Doug, I'll do anything. Learn, I said simply. Not about art prices or investment values. Learn about art itself. Learn what makes it matter. Learn about the people who create it and the people who cherish it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a card. This is Dr. Sandra Wong. She's a professor of art history at the University of Alberta. She's agreed to give you a private seminar, one Saturday a month for the next year. Canadian art history. The group of 7, what they were trying to say, why it mattered, how they saw this country. Philippe took the card with trembling hands. And one more thing, I said. You're going to spend one afternoon a month with me, at my job, at the school. His eyes widened. You're going to see what I do. Meet the kids, meet the teachers. See what it takes to keep a building running, to make a space where people can learn and grow. You're going to understand that honest work isn't something to be pitied. It's something to be respected. I looked at Christine, who was crying openly now. Your wife has been trying for 4 years to bridge two worlds, your world and mine. She's exhausted from the effort. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to meet her halfway. You're going to stop speaking French to exclude people. You're going to stop measuring everyone by their net worth. You're going to learn that family isn't about what you own. It's about what you share. Philippe stood up abruptly. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might try to defend himself. Instead, he bowed. Not a casual nod, a proper bow, from the waist, the kind you give someone you've wronged. Monsieur Mackenzie, he said, his voice cracking. Je suis désolé. J'avais tellement tort. Pardonnez-moi. I'm sorry. I was so wrong. Forgive me. I stepped forward and helped him straighten up, put my hands on his shoulders. Nous faisons tous des erreurs, I said in French. We all make mistakes. Ce qui compte, c'est comment on les corrige. What matters is how we correct them. He nodded, unable to speak. The dinner party dissolved after that. Conversations became quieter, more real. Mr. Bergman shook my hand and told me he'd love to hear more about my grandmother. Jean-Pierre and Monique approached me awkwardly, offered halting apologies in English. Mark and Sylvie looked ashamed in a way that suggested they were reconsidering some things. Later, after most of the guests had left, it was just Christine, Philippe, and me in the kitchen. Christine was making tea, the way Maggie used to. Why? Philippe asked quietly. After everything I said, everything I thought about you, why would you give me that painting? Why would you forgive me? I thought about that for a long moment. Thought about Maggie, who had forgiven my stubbornness 1,000 times. Thought about my father, who had taught me that anger was a burden you carry, not a weapon you wield. Because that's what family does, I said finally. We correct each other. We teach each other. We give each other chances to be better. I looked at the painting, still sitting on the kitchen table. And because that painting means nothing hanging in a museum or hidden in a closet, it means something when it's loved by someone who understands what it represents. Someone who's earned the right to carry that history forward. I picked up the painting and held it out to him. Earn it, I said simply. He took it with trembling hands, stared at it like he was seeing it for the first time. I will, he whispered. I promise. That was a year ago. Philippe has been taking the seminars with Dr. Wong religiously. Every month, he comes back with notes, with questions, with genuine enthusiasm about artists I'd never heard of. He's learning to see, really see, not just evaluate. And yes, he comes to the school with me. Once a month, he puts on old clothes and helps me with whatever needs doing. Replacing ceiling tiles, painting hallways, fixing lockers that students have jammed shut. The kids love it. This fancy businessman in paint-splattered coveralls, getting dirty alongside the janitor. Some of the teachers have started calling him Doug's apprentice. More importantly, he's learning to talk to people. Not at them, with them. Learning their names, their stories. Learning that the custodian and the CEO are both just people trying to get through the day. Christine tells me the French-only conversations have stopped at family gatherings. Philippe insisted on it. When Jean-Pierre objected, Philippe told him that if they had something to say, everyone should be able to hear it. That was a proud moment. Last month, for my 65th birthday, Philippe and Christine gave me a gift. It was a photograph, beautifully framed. The painting that my grandmother had kept, now hanging in Philippe's home office. But it wasn't alone anymore. Around it, he'd arranged other pieces, small prints and postcards of group of 7 works, carefully labeled with dates and histories. And in the center, a photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, one I'd given Philippe months ago. Below the photograph, in careful handwriting, Philippe had written, "For Doug, thank you for teaching me what value really means." I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. The painting is where it belongs now, with someone who understands that its worth isn't in what it costs, but in what it carries, the years, the kindness, the love. My grandmother would have approved. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't the fastest one. Sometimes you wait, you watch, you teach, And sometimes you take something that was dismissed as worthless and use it to build a bridge between generations, between worlds, between who we are and who we're capable of becoming. Philippe still has a lot to learn. We all do. But he shows up. Every seminar, every workday, every Sunday dinner, he shows up, ready to listen, ready to grow. And that's all any of us can really do. The painting hangs in Philippe's office now. A small rectangle of color, of movement, of life frozen in oil and pigment. 90 years old and still speaking to everyone who takes the time to look. That's what makes it valuable. That's what makes anything valuable. Not the price tag, the legacy. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. And leave a comment below telling me if you've ever been underestimated because of what you do for a living. I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, take care of each other.